Sometimes black slaves in the United States would dare to rebel and run away. However, as they had nowhere to go, given that there was a distance of thousands of kilometers between America and Africa, they were soon captured and punished. But it becomes quite hard to imagine how severely they were punished. It's because living as slaves was already a punishment. Once they committed any perceived wrongdoing, they were given the punishment that made them truly horrified. Masters were creative in inventing new forms of punishments that not only could inflict unbearable pain on slaves, but also act as an example for those slaves who were planning to rebel. From putting on a tin mask with only small holes so minimum breathing can take place to putting on an iron collar and using a thumbscrew, some of the worst and most disturbing punishments were given to black slaves, especially black women slaves. But what more punishments were given, and how were these punishments administered? Let's know about that in this video.
The Black History Archives.
Number 10. Tying black women slaves with table for sexual exploitation. Usually, black women slaves did not need to commit crimes to be liable for punishments. Their mere existence was enough excuse for the white men to punish and exploit her and to get pleasure from doing so. Black women slaves would be forcibly removed from their huts and dragged to a designated room where she was subjected to abuse by multiple white men. This terrifying experience robbed victims of their agency and left them defenseless against their attackers. Once inside the room, black women slaves were placed face down on a table and bound, rendering them completely powerless and vulnerable to assault. The table, serving as a cold and unforgiving surface, further dehumanized the experience, adding to the horror of the situation. The perpetrators of these vile acts were often numerous white men who took turns abusing the helpless victim, highlighting the systemic devaluation of black women within the institution of slavery. Each assailant inflicted unimaginable trauma on the victim, who was forced to endure relentless abuse. Her legs would be opened and tied so sexual exploitation could be done, and one man after the other could take turns. Sexual exploitation served various purposes within the system of slavery. It was used as a means of exerting power and control over the enslaved population, reinforcing ideas of white supremacy and dominance. Additionally, it served as a tool of economic exploitation, with enslaved women being forced to bear children who would also be enslaved, perpetuating the cycle of bondage for generations. The consequences of sexual exploitation for black women slaves were profound and long-lasting. They endured physical pain and suffering, often resulting in injuries and health problems. Emotionally and psychologically, they struggled with the trauma of being violated in such a degrading manner, leaving lasting scars that persisted long after their physical wounds had healed. Once all white men had used her completely, she would be left in the room for hours, feeling helpless and defeated. Then, she would be untied and taken to the same hut she was dragged from. Number 9. Suspended beneath cooking fire. During the period of slavery in the United States, black slaves endured a particularly brutal form of punishment where they were suspended beneath the cooking fire. This method wasn't just about causing physical pain, it was a deliberate tactic to instill fear and maintain control over the enslaved population. Administering this punishment was a merciless process. Enslaved individuals would first be tied up by their masters or overseers, often using ropes or chains to prevent any resistance. Once tied, they would then be lifted up and suspended under the cooking fire, usually fueled by a large open flame used for cooking or heating. The method of suspension varied, but slaves were commonly hung by their wrists or ankles, their bodies just above the flames. Sometimes ropes tied to their limbs or around their torso left them dangling dangerously close to the fire. The flames would be stoked, sending intense heat and choking smoke toward the suspended black slave. As they hung there, they endured not only the burning pain, but also the suffocating smoke, causing immense suffering. This punishment inflicted both physical agony and psychological terror. The enslaved person faced the terrifying possibility of being burned alive, with no chance of escape and entirely at the mercy of their masters or overseers. The aim of this punishment was twofold: to punish the individual slave for any perceived wrongdoing and to serve as a warning to others in the enslaved community. Seeing the horrific fate of a fellow slave reminded others of the consequences of resistance, effectively deterring them from challenging their master's authority. Number 8. Thumbscrew. The thumbscrew was a device designed to inflict excruciating pain by crushing the fingers or thumbs of the victim. It consisted of two flat metal bars with screws that tightened around the fingers or thumbs, causing severe compression and often resulting in fractures or dislocations. Black slaves endured this agonizing punishment for perceived infractions or acts of resistance. Administering the thumbscrew punishment was typically the responsibility of overseers or slaveholders. Enslaved individuals would be tied to prevent resistance, and then the thumbscrew would be applied and gradually tightened, causing intense pain. Some endured prolonged torture before the device was finally removed. But no matter when it was removed, the black slave would have crushed fingers. Sometimes black slaves who were considered a threat would be given this punishment the next day on the already crushed fingers. This was a sadistic treatment because the purpose of punishment had already been served earlier. Number 7. Tin mask. The tin mask, also known as an iron muzzle or iron bridle, was another cruel punishment inflicted upon rebellious enslaved individuals. It covered their face with a metal plate and straps, preventing them from speaking or eating. Administering this punishment involved forcibly fitting the device onto the victim's face, often with assistance, and securing it tightly to prevent movement of the jaw. Molded tightly to conform to the head and face, the mask often featured sharp edges or protrusions that pierced the skin, resulting in cuts, bruises, and abrasions. Its weight bore down heavily on the wearer's head and neck, causing strain and discomfort, while the confined space within restricted breathing and airflow, inducing feelings of suffocation and claustrophobia. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. Number 6. Iron collar. The iron collar imposed upon black slaves during the era of slavery in the United States epitomizes the severe mistreatment endured by enslaved individuals. This method entailed fastening a weighty iron collar around the neck of the enslaved person, serving as a visible symbol of their subjugation and a tool of control wielded by white slave owners and overseers. Made to inflict both physical and psychological suffering, the iron collar was typically made from solid iron or other sturdy metals, weighing several pounds. Its sheer weight caused significant discomfort and strain on the wearer's neck and shoulders, resulting in muscle fatigue and soreness over time. Moreover, the collar often included sharp edges or protrusions that penetrated the skin, causing cuts, bruises, and abrasions. The continual pressure and friction against the neck could lead to chafing and irritation, causing open wounds and infections, particularly when worn for prolonged periods without removal. Furthermore, the iron collar was frequently combined with other forms of punishment and control, such as chaining the enslaved person to stationary objects or tethering them to other individuals. This amalgamation intensified the suffering experienced by the victims, leaving them in an ongoing state of fear and anxiety. Number 5. Mutilation. The cruel practice of mutilation inflicted upon black slaves during the era of slavery in the United States was a brutal method employed to instill fear, maintain control, and reinforce white supremacy. Mutilation took on various forms, each designed to degrade and dehumanize enslaved individuals while serving as a deterrent to others considering disobedience or resistance. One prevalent form of mutilation was the amputation of limbs, such as hands, feet, or ears. This brutal punishment was often meted out for perceived infractions or acts of defiance by enslaved individuals. Amputations were typically carried out crudely, using tools like axes, knives, or saws, without the use of anesthesia or proper medical care. The agony and trauma inflicted by such mutilations were severe, resulting in physical impairment and lifelong emotional scars for the victims. In certain cases, black slaves were subjected to genital mutilation, particularly as punishment for perceived sexual transgressions or acts of resistance. This barbaric practice caused irreparable harm, inflicting intense physical pain and psychological trauma while asserting dominance and control over their bodies. The act of mutilation was often carried out publicly, with other enslaved individuals forced to witness the brutality as a means of reinforcing obedience and submission. This public display of violence aimed to terrorize the enslaved community, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of disobedience and rebellion. Number 4. Insertion of hooks into ribs. During the period of slavery in the United States, black slaves were subjected to various brutal forms of punishment, among the most chilling being hooking, a method where hooks were inserted into their ribs, suspending them in midair. This was a cruel tactic employed by white slave owners and overseers to assert dominance and instill fear within the enslaved community. The process of hooking typically started with the slave being tied to prevent resistance. Once immobilized, sharp metal hooks were inserted into the slave's flesh, often near the rib cage or under the armpits. These hooks were designed to securely support the individual's weight when suspended. Subsequently, the enslaved person would be raised off the ground and suspended by ropes or chains attached to the hooks. The height at which they were hung varied, but they were frequently left dangling just above the ground or slightly elevated, amplifying the pressure on their ribs. The act of hanging from hooks inflicted excruciating pain on the enslaved individual. The sharp hooks pierced their flesh, causing deep wounds and tearing through muscle tissue. The pressure exerted by their body weight against the hooks caused intense discomfort and could lead to bone fractures or dislocations. Furthermore, the prolonged suspension subjected the enslaved person to prolonged agony. The strain on their muscles and ligaments resulted in fatigue and exhaustion, while the position hindered proper breathing, inducing feelings of suffocation and panic. Number 3. Smoked alive. During smoking, the enslaved person's hands and feet would be tied, and then they would be suspended over a fire, often fueled by slowly burning green wood or tobacco stems. This setup exposed them to the fire's smoke and heat without getting too close to the flames. As a result, their suffering was prolonged, with the person slowly suffocating and enduring intense heat, all while completely unable to escape or protect themselves. Smoking wasn't just about causing extreme physical pain and suffering. It was also a way to publicly terrorize other enslaved individuals and reinforce the power of slaveholders. This cruel method aimed to maintain control and crush any thoughts of resistance or rebellion among the enslaved population. Number 2. Hogshead. The hogshead punishment was an exceptionally cruel and humiliating form of punishment suffered by black slaves throughout the era of chattel slavery in the United States. During this punishment, enslaved individuals were forced into large wooden barrels or casks, typically used for storing or transporting goods like tobacco. These barrels, called hogsheads, were just big enough to hold a person but incredibly cramped and uncomfortable. Once inside the hogshead, the enslaved person would be sealed in, thrust into darkness and confinement. This punishment caused not only physical discomfort, but also profound psychological distress as the individual grappled with intense claustrophobia and overwhelming isolation. The hogshead punishment wasn't merely about causing physical pain, it was a tool of domination and control used to instill fear and submission in enslaved individuals. It was often employed as punishment for those who dared to resist, attempt escape, or defy their enslavers in any manner. People could remain trapped inside the hogshead for hours or even days, enduring unbearable conditions and immense suffering. Beyond the immediate physical agony, the psychological trauma inflicted by this punishment was lasting and profound, reinforcing the inherent power imbalance of slavery and further dehumanizing Black individuals. Number 1. Tarring and feathering. Tarring and feathering was a brutal punishment inflicted on Black slaves. The process began by heating tar until it became liquid. Once hot enough, the tar was poured or spread onto the victim's body, causing intense pain as it burned upon contact with the skin. After applying the tar, feathers were added by tossing or pressing them into the sticky substance. This created a humiliating and grotesque appearance, trapping the victim in a thick, sticky mixture that made movement difficult and breathing uncomfortable. The humiliation of tarring and feathering was profound. Victims were often paraded through public areas where they faced ridicule, jeering, and mockery from onlookers. This public display aimed not only to physically punish, but also to shame and dehumanize the victim in front of their community. Did you already know that these horrific punishments were given to Black slaves? Do you know about any punishment that is little told about? In the comments section right below, share your thoughts on these punishments and reparations for the descendants of slaves who were punished in these ways. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.